Well, hello everybody, and sorry we are late. We had some behind the scenes tardiness, but it's all good. We are happy to here to talk about John Steinbeck's Pastures of Heaven. If you have not read this book, we will start spoiler free with just a very brief kind of overview of what this book is, and all of us will give kind of some of our thoughts about it. Then we'll kind of dive into the stories in a spoiler fashion. But yeah, I like that one. I have yeah, we have the same one there. Evie, same one. Yeah, these are all I have. I think I've read 15 Steinbecks, and I have all the Penguin ones. I have the 6 in the box set, and then I have the other like 9 or whatever like this. So I like my editions to match as much as I can. But Pastures of Heaven was an early work of Steinbeck's, and it's a interconnected short story collection. And the thing I'll say before I turn it over to the panel is I recently read, back in December, I read Steinbeck's debut, which is Cup of Gold, which is a work of historical fiction. And like maybe the biggest improvement from a second book from a first book of any author I've read, because I thought this was absolutely fantastic. And Cup of Gold is probably the only Steinbeck I can't recommend to people. So, yeah, Pastures of Heaven was fantastic. And I'm just we're going to go around the horn and talk about it. So let's Tolorosito is a character in the stories, but Carlos from StoryTube, welcome. It's late over there in Dublin, but thank you for joining us. And what did you think about The Pastures of Heaven by Steinbeck?
Thanks for having me. It's not that late. We're all right. I really love this. So I was saying backstage that I've had a really busy week in work, so I still have 2 stories left, but we'll soldier on. But I think that The Pastures of Heaven contains all of the elements that Steinbeck later kind of made his own. It has his fascination with nature versus nurture. It has all of his nice, rich, descriptive prose about nature and how it kind of relates to what the characters are feeling in the stories as well, which he loves doing in later works. And yeah, I found it really absorbing. Each story, the kind of omniscient narrator taking you through the lives of these people, it was just very absorbing. It was really nice to read. A nice kind of slow read too.
How much Steinbeck have you read before this one?
I'm not keeping count, but quite a few. And me and Evie have read quite a few together. So I don't know, like
10 8, at least.
10, yeah.
Okay, cool. So you're well read with Steinbeck as well. Cool. So Johanna from Johanna Reads, what did you think of Pastures of Heaven?
I really liked it. I thought it was a very solid collection. I am not as well read when it comes to Steinbeck as you all are. I'm a bit embarrassed to admit that I'm first of all, disclaimer, I always claim this on my channel. I'm the most ill-read person when it comes to classics. I don't even think I got to Grapes of Wrath in high school, though we talked about it. I don't remember us actually reading the story. And I have read East of Eden by Steinbeck. I do much prefer East of Eden over this collection, but this was still very solid, engaging all the way through. I honestly don't think I have anything critical to say about this collection. So I think it was a good solid reading experience. I won't say that like it hit the highs for me, like I said, of East of Eden, which I love, but I enjoy Steinbeck's writing style. I like what you were saying, Carlos, about how it's absorbent. And according to the introduction in this Classics edition, this Penguin Classics edition by James Nagle, he was talking about that, how this was early in Steinbeck's career, but you start to see similar elements come through. Specifically, he attributes it to the naturalist. No, not the naturalist. Is it right? Naturalism? Yeah, no, naturalist a genre is how he attributes this book. So we could talk about that later. That's the one thing that, oh, nice. Yeah. That's the one thing that I will say, I do prefer your edition, Carlos. Like, I just think the cover looks way more slick. That's the Penguin Modern edition. So
Classics,
Penguin
yeah.
has two different kinds of editions. They do classics editions, and then they do the modern editions. And I actually kind of like some of the modern covers better. But the nice thing about the classics edition is they do have more formal notes. So they have this long
Yeah.
introduction, and that's always kind of nice to look back on after you finish. So yeah, it was a
I
good
forgot to read the introduction after reading it because I never read it first because it always has spoilers in there, and I totally forgot to go. I'll have to go back and read that. But well, that's great. I think it's even if you it's not going to compare to East of Eden. I mean, East of Eden for me is like one of the best books ever written. But I think I thought it was still very strong as well.
Mhm.
So, Evie, so you and Carlos have read like 8 to 10. What did you think of Pastures of Heaven?
Yeah, it actually makes me very sad to hear you say that Cups of Gold is one that you would not recommend, because that's actually one I'm really looking forward to reading, just because just in the second book you can see thematically already what he plays with in the rest of his novels and works. He's really focused on nature and just the experience of society and culture, and just the breadth of this story, interconnected story. It's so good, and I don't know, I just really really liked it. I enjoyed the kind of going in and out of the life of this valley, the pastures of heaven, and seeing how it develops, and seeing how really the start of this entire thing is the encroachment of humans upon nature, and how that all relates to everyone's stories within the individual stories, and how it ends with the last story. It's I don't annotate, like actually write in books that often, other than maybe a line or two, but in this one I not only like highlighted based on like thematic things that he's looking at, but I did full on like notes as I was reading, because I just feel like Steinbeck is so rich, and that this is his second novel, and he's already a master at just having that richness in there and that intentionality. It's just so good. So
That bit about like humans encroaching on nature, and also
the colonialism aspect of it.
yeah, and how like we all lie to ourselves, so like encroaching on ourselves almost in a very deep way. But all of the characters, not all the characters, but a lot of the characters lie to themselves about their own realities. And the prologue and the epilogue are also sort of delusions of grandeur, or romanticizing a land that isn't yours. Where like the Spanish corporal at the beginning is like, oh my god, this place is literally heaven. And then the tourists at the end of the book, no spoilers, they're also just like, wow, this place must be just a wonderful place to live. And all the stories you get in between are a bunch of people just lying to themselves about their lives in this place that's so nice. Yeah, I kind of like that through line through this collection, and I liked it a lot more than the other story collection we read last year. Evie, was it the Long Valley?
Yeah,
I like this one a lot more, actually.
Same.
Just for that.
Can I add to what Carlos said here? Because I found that almost darkly humorous about this collection is
Yeah.
the yes, I completely agree that these characters in this story are constantly self-deluding themselves. They're constantly holding on to this false hope of things are going to look up for me, or they're going to do this, and life or fate, if you will, or whatever, goes against them every time. And that I guess, coincides with the naturalism genre, which is this idea that's a very deterministic idea of life, that things are just going to intervene and come down on you hard, and things are not going to go your way despite your wishes. But also, I feel like the way he set this up at the beginning was kind of crushing and darkly humorous, like I said, because you do have the beginning with the Spanish colonizers, and then at the end of the first story, there is that line. The families at last lived prosperously and at peace. Their land was rich and produced, their land was rich and easy to work. The fruits of the gardens were the finest produced in Central California. So it sounds like, yay, now we're going to get these stories about these merry, happy people living on a farm, and maybe like a happy green pasture and cow going by. And no, it's like, it not only gets dark, but it gets darker and darker and darker as you go on in the collection. And every single one, it's like, yeah, it's some fault of I mean, there are horrible afflictions that happen to people. Some people who are victims of just some terrible things that happen. And in fact, a lot of children who are afflicted by mental health conditions and just some really difficult situations, poverty, neglect, alcohol abuse. You have a lot of things present in the story that are really hard. But then you also have some characters that in almost every story, a character who's just like holding on to like everything's going to get better, and then it doesn't.
I loved how I love the structure of this book, because you did have, and we've been calling it a prologue and an epilogue, but it's really just, he just numbers all of the stories, 1 through 12. So like number 1 and number 12 do feel like a prologue and an epilogue. And I think they were perfect bookends for these stories, because they do kind of bring in that, like at the very beginning, for lack of a better description, it's like the rose-colored glasses, like this, Pastures del Cielo. It's the pastures of heaven. It's beautiful. And then you get all of these stories in here where just some horrible things happen. But then at the end, you're almost waxing nostalgic again about this beautiful area, because the landscape is so beautiful, but the people and a lot of the circumstances were not so. And I thought it brought it together really, really well. And I like when I've been thinking about this, because I'm reading right now another, it's not Steinbeck, but another connected short story collection. And I love when authors are able to do that when it works. And I think it works really, really well here. I think there was just enough of a through narrative. I mean, we had the setting in common, and we saw characters kind of move in and out of the stories. And of course, we saw the Monroe family was there the most, but there was enough in there that it just felt like it flowed from story to story. And it didn't seem like, okay, well, here's just another story set here. It seemed like it all just logically built to, the big bad things at the end, and then the epilogue at the end. And I really admired that, because again, coming off of his first novel that I thought had some major structural issues, it was pretty masterful. Just the improvement from that novel to this novel.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it in the Discord that like, I don't know if John Steinbeck was a fan of James Joyce or even loved the Dubliners, but this definitely seems like at least a response to Dubliners, if not an outright or inspiration inspired by Dubliners, if not an outright response to Dubliners, with the interconnectedness of everything, of these characters. Because I felt, based on how it started in those first 2 stories, I thought it was going to be more linear in its following of characters, and it's just going to be, okay, one generation, then the next generation, and the next generation. But no, you follow this family, and then you follow another family that has some slight, relations to the previous family, and then you move forward, and it's this other family. So I was surprised by that. And to your point, Josh, about the kind of and Carlos, the kind of idealism of it. An aspect of this that I kind of highlighted is just the what am I trying to say? This book is called The Pastures of Heaven, and the valley is called The Pastures of Heaven. And there's just so many references to Judeo-Christian sin throughout this work. You know, there's the violence, there's gluttony, there's murder, there's lust. And that's something that I kept picking up on throughout. And it seems like, and I'll have to, maybe you guys can confirm or deny your reading of this, but it feels like, to a point, that each of the stories are somewhat of a depiction of one of the
deadly
sins.
I could see that.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
It's a bit of his early inspiration for East of Eden, which is actually one that Evie and I have not read yet, but I know the general gist. But that kind of using religious imagery or religious analogs, I guess, to tell a sort of Garden of Eden story, which, as far as I know, East of Eden is like, there's a bit of, Cain and Abel and
yeah.
that kind of thing. Here, it is like people taking from the Garden of Eden, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, the sins, I like that. I didn't pick up on that, actually.
Yeah, I love that. I love that interpretation. I will add, though, what you said about influences, Evie. It does mention Faulkner as a possible influence for what is called this is called a short story cycle, is how the introduction writer James Nagle describes it, a short story cycle. And he talks about works such as Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. I mean, so the tradition of this goes back pretty far. And that one of the artistic challenges is always unity. And if I recall correctly, and I'm not looking up the exact part, but I want to say that he went back and reworked this cycle. I want to say I read in somewhere in the introduction that Steinbeck wrote this and then decided after he wrote it to insert the Monroe family as a unifying feature throughout the stories.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But that apparently, even though this does have its roots in a longer standing tradition, I want to say he also says here in the introduction that some of the critics were a little puzzled about this genre, like they didn't quite get it. They were like, "Wait, what are we dealing with here?" It wasn't like it was totally negatively received, but I think there was a little bit of confusion about it. Like, I don't think it was as maybe wide in the circles at that time. Maybe, I don't know. I don't really understand that, because obviously he does mention Faulkner here, and as Evie mentioned, but yeah, I think it's pretty neat. I had never come across this before. I didn't know that. I mean, it makes sense when you say like Canterbury Tales, but which I have not read, but I know the general idea behind that. But I just think that's really clever to have a unifying element like that. And I guess the idea is that, well, there's the Battle Farm. So we have the Spanish colonizers, and then years and years later, people start to, I guess there are some squatters on the land, and then eventually we set up this village. We have a post office, a schoolhouse, and then 20 families of farms. And so these collection of short stories kind of goes in and out of these various families. And I like what you were saying, Evie, because I agree. I think that part of the charm of this collection, we do see the Monroe family as the unifying feature. Like, the Monroes are always mentioned, even if it's a little bit more in passing, they're always mentioned in every story. But also, like, you cross over other characters too. Like, you get to know Alan, and you get to know Miss Morgan, and you get to know this person, and
Pat Humbert.
Yeah, I love that. I think it was fun. It made you feel like, I don't know, there was some kind of connection to that small town feeling. And I have something in my heart for a small town atmosphere. So even though, yeah, this was very clever, I think, in the way that he brought that together.
Was Miss Morgan the same teacher from the Dularecito story? Was she the same teacher?
I think so. Yeah.
Yes, she was definitely like mentioned She's mentioned in a few different
She's
stories.
mentioned a few. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like her a lot.
Miss Morgan and Miss Martin were the two teachers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It might have been Miss Martin in the first story.
Oh,
I don't
maybe.
remember.
I think because I think there's an early story where one of the teachers gets sick, if I'm mistaken, and then Miss Morgan, I don't know, maybe I'm
She
mistaken
takes
about that.
over. Right.
I could be wrong about that detail, but
It's interesting that this one was not critically acclaimed, at least at the time, because shortly after this, he came out with The Red Pony, which is
Masterpiece.
longer stories, but is considered one of his fine works. So it's just interesting that maybe if I don't know the chronology, but maybe because that one didn't have as many stories, because if I'm recalling, I think it was 4 interconnected stories was The Red Pony.
Yep.
Maybe it was easier to follow for critics at the time.
I think it's also like this one. Yeah, I guess it's a short story cycle, but I think you could make the argument it's just a kind of novel. It's an experimental novel. You just have an omniscient narrator, and the main character you follow is the place.
Yeah.
And The Red Pony, to me, I actually forget that it's 4 stories. In my mind, that's a novella, but it just felt complete to me. It felt this is one of a whole. These are not things that you can read like out of sequence or out of whatever. It very much follows that through line. And like Evie, to your point, it's been a long time since I read Dubliners. It's probably 15 years. That was a school thing. I don't remember it being quite as linear in this way, but obviously the through line of that is the city, you know. So in that sense, I guess it is pretty influenced by that.
That's a good point about at least contrasting this with The Red Pony, how those stories do connect, because you probably could read all the stories in this collection except for 1 and 12. I mean, you read them by themselves, but those are kind of the prologue, epilogue. But all the other stories, you probably could just read them by themselves because they are pretty much self-contained, even though there is the through line of the Monroes and other characters. That's interesting.
Yeah, he did go through some setbacks with the publishing. It says here, I'm just skipping around here in the introduction. It says, shortly after publication of Steinbeck's book, this publisher also declared bankruptcy. So there was like some bankruptcy with the publishers, and there were just some different external circumstances, which is a little ironic given the theme of the story and what happens, the setbacks that the characters go through. It's like, oh, I'm going to have luck. I'm getting published. Oh, they went bankrupt. Oh, well, then, it seems like he did have some challenges with getting this off the ground, but it wasn't like it was totally negatively received. There were some comments here. It says author's charming serenity of style. There is clarity, good humor, and delicacy in Mr. Steinbeck's writing that makes the book fine reading. So I think that there were some things. Also, really quickly, it says here that Miss Morgan was partly influenced by Steinbeck's mother, Molly Morgan. Yeah. He drew on the experiences of his mother in the early years of her career.
Wow.
So I thought that was interesting.
I really like the sorry, Evie, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, so we kind of like talked about this in relation to The Red Pony and just the completeness of it. And just this being obviously his second work. As I was reading this, I couldn't help but think of his other works that I've read. I should say that we've read, Carlos. Just the Pastures of Heaven being this depiction of this area is very much akin to Cannery Row. Like it's also a portrait of an area and the people within it. And then specifically Toloresito, he just feels like a proto-Lenny.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a type of character he does in a
Yeah.
lot of stuff, isn't it?
What kind of character? I'm sorry. Which one is that? I'm sorry. I'm failing to remember who that is.
Tolorecito was the man who I guess I think he's definitely autism coded, some sort of learning disability, but or neurodivergence. But he's the one that he basically assaults women because he doesn't know any better.
He was the one who was an orphan baby found, and he's kind of an
Oh.
artist.
Oh,
And
okay.
when when people mess with his art, he turns violent.
Yeah.
That was my favorite story because I liked the teacher a lot.
Yeah, that's Miss Morgan.
That's Miss Morgan. Cool.
That was Miss
Right.
Morgan. Yeah.
I was trying to remember which of the two teachers that was, but yeah.
Because she turns him on to gnomes and says, "Oh, if you stay up at night, you can find the gnomes." And then she even envies that.
Yeah, I love the end of that story when he kind of, spoiler, goes off to sort of rejoin his people or something. I thought that story was, of the ones that I've now read, because I still have 2 left, was the most kind of rounded. Like, you had your beginning, and then you almost had a beginning of life to end of life potentially of that character, who is also a very Steinbeck character, like Lenny from Of Mice and Men.
Yeah.
There's one in The Grapes of Wrath as well. It's a theme that he likes to explore, but he's also very empathetic to those characters, even if some are troubled to the point of committing violence to other people, you know? It's almost like the world treats them. What am I trying to say? You know, the way people have a certain assumption about like Rottweilers or about certain kinds of dogs. But if you raise a dog like that with a lot of love, they're not necessarily going to have the reputation that people think they have. And I think that's kind of everything that Steinbeck writes about. It's how we treat people will come out in how they treat people. And I really like that.
I like that too. Yeah.
Evie, you had mentioned Cannery Row. One probably might be Steinbeck's most colorful cast of characters in that book. I just love those characters, but I loved here how easily he was able to bring a lot of these characters to life in just the short form. And I marvel at authors that can do that, because I've read novels with characters that have less depth than some of these characters that we only have for like 12, 15 pages in these stories. And I think that's something that Steinbeck was good at, obviously, very early in his career. And I think I've seen it written as he's good at writing kind of the everyman or the every person, characters that are just very human and very real and very flawed. And I like that side of it, because we did see so clearly just kind of how these people just felt like real people. Whether they were getting frustrated with each other or they were trying to pull one off of another person or whatever it was, it just felt very, very real. And I thought it was a pretty masterful job of him to be able to do this in the short form, because I think that's not always done in short fiction. I think short fiction, the one thing that is often done really well is more thematic kind of things, not necessarily giving you a lot of depth of character. And I thought he was able to pull it off here really well.
Yeah, I think the everyman idea that he has, I've always sort of found or interpreted as he writes about, he criticizes ambition and kind of negative ambition.
Yes.
And there's obviously a lot of class issues in his stuff where he will kind of criticize middle class morality in a way. And like sort of middle class view of someone who is maybe deemed non-conformist, I suppose. And he writes those characters with a lot of empathy, kind of in the way like someone like Dickens. When everyone was writing about the British aristocracy, Dickens was writing about the kid with no shoes on the street corner living in the slums. Steinbeck was doing that at a time in American history where ambition was all about money.
Golden Age, Jazz Age, and all that.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Where he's just writing about people like one of the stories, I can't remember the character's name, who has the farm, but he's kind of just, was it Julius or something?
That was Junius, yeah.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to do anything. He just wanted to sit and read.
Oh my God. I was going to bring up that story when you talked about poverty. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it breaks that story is like heartbreaking in some ways. Oh my goodness. It's a wild story. That might be like actually my favorite story in some ways. But
he felt so out of touch with reality.
Yeah.
He's raising a son. And like he's got a farm and he's doing nothing on the farm and they're just dirt poor.
But I love the moment because he raises a great kid. And the kid's amazing.
Yeah.
And the kid goes into the leader. Yeah. And then the kids want to be like the kid. And then the most heartbreaking thing is that when the community comes together and Mrs. Monroe wants to give clothes to this young boy, he's embarrassed. And Miss Morgan has that intuition. Like she knows that what this is going to do to this poor kid. And then he changes because he realizes he's poor and they have to move away. Oh my goodness. That was so heartbreaking.
It just shatters their reality because he's like, and I think it's Miss Morgan that says, but he didn't know he was poor till you gave him those clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he runs away.
Yeah.
That hit me hard because I grew up in a community that was pretty poor. I mean, my family was fine. We were middle class, but like when I went back as an adult after being gone for a while and visiting and kind of driving through my old neighborhood, I asked a friend, I said, was the poverty this bad when we were here? And he said, yeah, you just don't notice it when you're part of it. And it's kind of part of, who you are or your upbringing or whatever. So that part, like personally, I was just like, that is 100% true. Like you don't realize.
Yeah. It kind of reminded me of my childhood a little bit. I mean, I wasn't around, I would say I wasn't around extreme poverty, but I went to Catholic school where we all wore uniforms. And I always thought I actually was middle class, but I always thought we were poor because of the way my mother would talk about money. And then I remember going to a classmate's house who was the popular kid, the one everybody wanted to be like, and saw that they lived in a much, much like tiny, 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 tiny house with like 3 kids in a room. And like, it was tiny. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how privileged I was to have as much space as I lived in. Like I said, it wasn't like dire poverty or anything like that, but it brought a whole new perspective because I wouldn't know because we wore uniforms, you had no way of knowing how rich or poor people were. And then these other kids in the class who were struggling to keep up, they like their house, they lived in a mansion, and it was like, you just wouldn't know any of these things. So I kind of felt like there was something about that storyline that reminded me of that and about how kids can have a different perspective.
Yeah.
I remember the first time, this is a little personal now. I remember the first time I told my dad I realized we were dirt poor growing up, and I broke his heart. He was like, I thought you didn't know. And I was like, of course I fucking knew.
Gosh.
So what are some other situations or themes that kind of touched you personally in this book? Because I think with any stories like this where you have, characters and examination of humanity, I think there are things that are going to touch different people. Like I liked, I mean, it wasn't really a personal thing, but I liked at the very beginning how you could see that anytime in any of these stories someone moved in new, like just the distrust of this tight-knit community, they were always going to distrust the new people that came in, until they had been there long enough and kind of proven themselves to be part of the community, which I think is something that's probably pretty common with smaller communities like this. What are some other things that you appreciated or just noticed?
I mean, the violence against women, like, especially not just physical violence, but emotional and mental violence as well.
Control.
Control. Catherine, oh God, what was the last name? But Shark, in that story.
Yeah.
Catherine she's so maternal, and she finally, the like last bit of it that I highlighted was Catherine became power, and the power gushed in her body and flooded her. In a moment, she knew that what she was and what she could do. She was exultantly happy and very beautiful. All up to this point, she's very meek and like very quiet, and doesn't even is not really on the page at all, and not doing anything. And then as she's nurturing her husband, as he's realized he's lost everything, he's literally taking away her power from her, and she can feel it seeping from her. And that's just so sad. And then in a couple of stories later, Helen, what's her name? Helen
Van Deventer or something?
Yes. Her entire character is just so tragic. Yeah, it's
both of them also lying to themselves. Yeah.
That's the one about her daughter that has the health condition, or
Yep.
Yes. I had one of those lines tabbed with the doctor. Dr. Phillips left the house in disgust because he was like against her making this decision to move to the farm, and the obvious needless endurance of the woman always put him in fury. What a misogynist thing to say there. And if I were fate, he said, he mused, I'd be tempted to smash her placid resistance too. I don't know, just something about that storyline. I think that is pretty heartbreaking though, because there's that storyline, and I feel like there's another story in here where it's with the white side. Yeah. With the wanting to have a second child and the mother being unable to have the child. It's like my heart breaks for these mothers, because it's like, how can you blame a mother for not wanting to hold on to hope for their child, to have the best life possible, or to have another child to bring into the world? So I think, like, in some of the cases, like Shark, like the male shark and all that, like it's like, okay, you're just completely an idiot. But then with some of them, I'm like, that's just like even more heartbreaking.
I did, Anitha. I have 2 stories left, Anitha. Give me a break.
Anyway, I don't know. I just think there's something heartbreaking and tragic about what the mothers go through in this story. And yeah, I feel like in some cases, I don't know if I have to think about this more, but I think with some of the women, even with Miss Morgan, I feel like I sympathize with their situations maybe a little bit more than I do with some of the male characters. I don't know if that's wrong, but
no, I'd agree with that. And I think it was always, I thought it was always portrayed. It felt real to me, just kind of the plight of a lot of these women in these situations.
It's also portrayed fairly objectively, like the kind of omniscient narrator showing you who these people are at their core.
Yeah.
Was kind of perfect, because you also sort of naturally empathize with everyone, even the people who do horrible things, because you really understand why. Like even Shark, I can't remember his name, but they call him Shark.
Yeah.
It's like this guy in a new place wants to create a new reality for himself, a new identity. He doesn't want that identity that he builds for himself to be shattered, and that he ultimately just becomes a control freak. And just this house of cards that he builds around himself is just gonna crash. But you kind of, at least at the beginning of that story, really empathize with him.
Yeah.
Even
I
though
do-
he then later does horrible things.
I do like the fact, as a just quick commentary on Shark specifically, I love the completely not subtle analog, whatever that phrase is, whatever that term is, but of a speculation, like the stock market. Like, at least that was my interpretation. Like, the idea of, you have this man who's speculating in his head, but he doesn't actually have anything, and everyone's making decisions based on what his thoughts are. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that's just, to me, sounds like the stock market. So,
Yeah.
Classic
Real.
Steinbeck. Got a
Yeah.
shit on the stock market.
Of course.
I got a kick even out of, I think it's like story 2, whenever we were introduced to the Monroe family and the way that we're described, May Monroe's bedroom, and her fluffy, I don't know, pink. I get this idea of like a pink bedroom, and there was some kind of stuffed animal on the bed, and there's her diary in the bedside table, and you get the impression that she's kind of superficial. And then the Jimmy's bedroom being totally different, and about, I want to say he has like bullets stocked away, and I don't know, different things, like the different objects that you would associate with the young man at that time. And he has like a very different understanding of people, and he's considered handsome, and he's considered somebody who has a past, and I don't know, this whole entire identity construction that's brought to life even just by going through their bedrooms, I thought was really clever. And I thought it was also really interesting too how May Monroe comes back in passing later on in this book. Like, she's barely mentioned in this book, but I got a kick out of, it was Mr. Whiteside's son. Is it, oh gosh, what's his son's name? John? I can't remember. I think it's John, but I could be wrong about that. Or maybe that's the father's name. But the son, we get to know the son, the Whiteside's son, in Miss Morgan's story when she moves in temporarily with the Whitesides. And he
Yeah.
keeps saying the stupidest things that are like heartbreaking. And I wondered, I don't know if you'd agree as well about this, Evie, but I got the impression that Whiteside's boy might be a bit neurodivergent. Like, he was just saying things without any clear sense of what he was maybe saying the wrong thing. I don't know.
Yeah, no social awareness, or, I mean, and also, like, at the same time, speaking as someone from a very small town, like, when you're from, or when you're in a very isolated area, you subsequently are not exposed and learn to be social in a correct way. So he's if I recall correctly, Miss Morgan is someone who actually comes in to Pastures of Heaven from
Yeah.
outside. So she's this foreign thing that he doesn't know how to deal with, in a way. He doesn't know how to socialize with her because she's not of Pastures of Heaven, of the place. She's from outside. So it's like, how do you communicate with the outside world when you're so isolated?
That's right. Yeah. And it's, I thought it was heartbreaking because I mean, when you read it from Miss Morgan's perspective, even though it's an omniscient narrator, you can't help but feel for her. It's like, oh, this is her father you're talking about, and you're just making these rude kind of comments without realizing you're being rude. And then she tries to just remove herself from the situation, even though the Whiteside parents want them to get together. And obviously that doesn't happen. But I thought it was almost kind of perfect because in another storyline, second to the last one, that Carlos is not read yet. So sorry for spoilers, Carlos.
All right.
But that guy who wants to fix up his parents' sitting room, he wants to go after May Monroe. And he has this whole dream, this whole fantasy about how she's going to come and what she's going to do and where she's going to stand and what she's going to say and how he's going to present her. And he goes over the script in his head over and over and over again. And then he finds out May is in fact getting married to that white side guy. And I was like, that's kind of perfect. They're kind of perfect together. Like putting it all together in my head.
It was.
Is that the Pat Humbert story? Is that Pat Humbert?
The second to the last story, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, because I know that they're. I think I'm trying to figure out. Was it
that
the last?
Sounds probably
one?
right. I apologize because I'm really forgetting names.
I also read that as how he kept building it up and building it up and building it up while also taking forever to finally finish that so he could get up the nerve to ask her, and then by then she was off the market. Like, oh, dude.
Oh my goodness, it was so oh, it was so funny. I mean, it was tragic but so funny at the same time.
Yeah.
Because he was going over every detail in his mind over and over and over again. Like maybe OCD, who knows? I don't know. Now we're gonna have this whole diagnosis here, but
well, I mean, it goes back to kind of what we've been talking about of like all these characters have a sense of delusion, and Pat in his ways, he has this delusion that if I make this room perfect because it's what she likes, she'll marry me, rather than, I don't know, maybe getting to know this woman and actually talking to her.
Don't say such preposterous things, Evie.
No. It's like cave woman, pound on head, dragged to house.
Yeah, right?
Yes, it is Pat Humbert, by the way. Yeah.
Okay, then I have one story left.
Oh, okay, perfect. Then you did read that. Yeah. Good.
And well, we can not talk about the last one then, not to spoil it, because I think the last one's very strong. So I don't want to ruin. I don't want to ruin where that story goes, because that one was quite a journey.
It was good.
Yeah. But
and just to make sure, are we talking about like the last story, not including like essentially the epilogue?
Correct.
Thing?
Okay. Yeah. So in my edition, it's story number 11. So that's the one that I have not read. So it was actually just one. Yes, so there you go, Anita. 11. I only have one story left, Anita.
Because Carlos said he read the 12th one, which is what we're calling the epilogue. But the one before that's a really strong one. So don't want to spoil that for you.
The one the thing I really like as well, to go back to sort of the beginning, the Monroe family story, and the sort of curse that you get is just the storytelling quality that he has, where what is it he says? I've had a lot of bad luck, he said. I've been in a lot of businesses and every one turned out bad. When I came down here, I had a kind of an idea that I was under a curse. Suddenly he laughed delightedly at the thought that had come to him. And what did I do? First thing out of the box, I buy a place that's supposed to be under a curse.
That's right.
And then he says something like, maybe my curse and the farm's curse got to fighting and kill each other off. I'm dead certain they've gone anyway. And then everybody laughs. And T.B. Allen says, that's a good one, but here's a better one. Maybe your curse and the farm's curse has mated and gone into a gopher hole like a pair of rattlesnakes. Maybe there'll be a lot of baby curses crawling around the pastures, the first thing we know. The men roared with laughter at that, and T.B. Allen memorized the whole scene so he could repeat it. And then all the rest of the stories start, and you see, I think Allen was right.
I love that. Yeah.
But I love that little bit of characterization, because I can picture Allen clearly, from that. Like, I need to remember that. I never write that down to remember that. Like, I can see that guy.
I'm going to tell this story to everybody that walks into shop,
Yeah.
So funny. Oh my goodness.
And it's good because there is a lot of dark stuff in this book, but there is a lot of humor. I mean, I've always, just said the thing with Steinbeck is he puts his characters through the ringer, and he puts them in some of the most horrible, abject experiences ever. But he does always infuse his stories with a lot of humor. I mean, like I think A Cannery Row is one of his more memorable, non kind of more mainstream books, and I think of that like it's kind of just it's a setting where everybody's very, very poor, except the doc, but there's such optimism and there's such humor and within the characters, and I just always appreciate that about Steinbeck.
So, I mean, this is like absolutely different in tone completely, but one of my favorite, this is a little Joanna Reed's fact, like one of my favorite shows of all time. Because I'm not really a big show watcher, but when I was young, I got into it. It was already after this was already done for a while, but I got into Northern Exposure. And that to this day is one of my favorite shows of all time. Like I love the writing and I love the humor. And it's all about a small town. If you all have never watched it, it's all about a small town in Alaska, though I think it was filmed in Canada. But anyway, it's a small town and and it's like that in a way. I mean, it's not as dark as this collection, but I love that kind of vibe. I love it. I love how like different episodes kind of highlight different characters in the small town and they kind of intersect, and it's so well done. It's so well done. Now as far as the nature aspect is concerned, it is called The Pastures of Heaven, and it's I actually feel like I like what Evie was going back to what Evie was saying about man encroaching on nature. I feel like nature is pretty benign in this story. Like I don't feel like it's a huge affliction to the characters. It's actually very beautiful when it's described in some ways. This is such a bad comparison. I apologize, but it kind of reminds me of Abercrombie whenever I read Abercrombie, because I feel like the world is pretty indifferent. The birds might be tweeting and people are killing themselves bloody or whatever. And there's some kind of funny thing about that juxtaposition. But yeah, I didn't feel like nature itself was a violence on the people. It was more just, I don't know what it was, their own fates, their own luck that just worked against them.
Or the farmers planting at the wrong time, or planting the wrong crop, or not knowing what they're doing. But yeah, it wasn't necessarily nature there, but the foibles of the humans in the story.
Yeah.
Okay, so final thoughts. Who is this book for?
So sorry that I had to step away, but I had heard Carlos talk about curses and stuff like that. So I just wanted to say that one of the thematic things that I kept picking up throughout this book was obviously, yes, nature is there, but there's also this supernatural, which I thought was interesting. So like there's obviously the curse, and then there's this idea of haunting, because there's mentions of like ghosts and stuff like that. And I just thought that was really interesting. Even though, to your point, Joanna, nature is very benign, I think Steinbeck is really amplifying that fact by the use of the supernatural, even though it's not supernatural, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, sorry, Josh, I apologize.
No, I'm just saying, who's this book for? What kind of reader could we recommend this book to? Because I think we all are just very positive on it.
John Steinbeck super fans.
Well, sure.
Is there anyone that John Steinbeck isn't for? Maybe we should reverse the question. Is there anybody who shouldn't read Steinbeck or wouldn't enjoy Steinbeck?
Yeah, I was just going to say people who could just appreciate a good book, a good writer. I don't know.
Yes, Anita.
I don't know, actually. That's a good question. Do you think Anita would like this?
I think so. So I think specifically Pastures of Heaven, I again, if you like very bird's eye view depictions of a place rather than of a person or an event, you just see the development over time. and throughout a community, I think this is a book for you.
Yeah, I think maybe if you're a plot-driven reader, this might not work for you because it is a lot of connected stories. But I think if you enjoy character, you're going to get that.
Yeah.
If you enjoy just accomplished writing, I mean, incredible writing for a second book. I mean, kind of ridiculous, really. You'll enjoy that. If you like kind of connective tissue of different themes going in and out of stories, I think this is something for you as well. So maybe just if you're a plot-driven reader, it's not for you, but I think probably everybody else.
Also, I think it's a perfect sampler for Steinbeck because there's a lot of themes in here that are then, I think, something like The Grapes of Wrath will just, he goes so much deeper into it. This is kind of a good primer for him. I mean, along with something like Of Mice and Men, which is very short as well.
Yeah.
But yeah. Other than that, people who like good books.
Yeah, I think the one drawback for somebody like Anita, because I always think of Anita as being a very character-centered reader who wants to see a journey with the character and see like a full arc with the character. Tell me if I'm wrong, Anita, but I always associate that with you, and that's not exactly what you get in this story. Like it's he paints some very realistic characters, but they don't change. They they're limited by their own self delusions and beliefs about things, and we have to and have bad luck over and over again and false hope. But yeah, I agree with everything else. Like it's still a very rich, well described portrait of a town. I like the connective tissue description. That was good with the stories weaving in and out. And I think also the small town atmosphere is really well presented in this collection as well.
Yes, Steinbeck's always good at just description. I mean, I'm not a, you guys know I'm not a very visual reader, but a lot of times his descriptive powers cause me to be able to see things a little bit better than a lot of other authors I read.
Yeah, and it's entertaining.
I do think there's
too. Yeah,
there is a balance in the book between, like, you know, the elements that people like to talk about of, oh, is it plot driven, character driven theme? I think it's I wouldn't necessarily put it in any of those categories. I think each of the individual stories, when you get into the meat of the middle, after the sort of setup, there's a lot of plot actually that, you know, is packed into very short page count stories. But also, I would say that some of the characters do change, but a lot of them get worse.
Yeah,
which is I think we talk a lot about character development, and we think of it as in maybe characters who come to a sort of a realization about themselves and grow, rather than characters like reverting into themselves because they get worse, which is also, I get, maybe not changing, but it's part of what he's saying. But I think the theme then just sort of comes out in, what do the characters do? How are they talking to other characters? And like just little plot developments that happen in each little story and how it all ties together. So I don't know if I would say, oh, maybe if you like plot, maybe you'd like some of the stories, but maybe you won't get the bird's eye view. Yeah,
I think that's completely fair.
yeah.
I also think tone-wise, it's really an interesting balance because it's dark, but it's not too dark. It's got its good balance with humor. You know what it reminds me of? Josh will get this reference. Like it reminds me a little bit, and my Italian is terrible, so I apologize, but like Dramma Giacoso, like that movement in Italian opera, like Mozart's Don Giovanni, like it reminds me a little bit of that. Like it's dark, but it's humorous, and it's got that perfect balance of those elements. So it doesn't feel heavy. It doesn't feel like a heavy, dense, dark read, but there are dark elements about human nature. And yet, like I said, I think that the humor somewhat balances it, but it does have some dark elements though. I'm not trying to downplay
Yeah.
the dark aspects there, because there are like lots of trigger warnings. Be warned, but yeah.
Everything you just said describes the history of Irish literature.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
We would call that grimity here.
Grimity. There you go. Yeah, grimity. I'll go with that.
Well, any other final thoughts about Pastures of Heaven?
Josh, your poll win was a success.
Finally. Oh yeah, I didn't even mention that at the start. This was the read of the Fireside Discord. We nominate a book anonymously, and then the Discord votes, and Johanna's been dominating for a year, and then finally my book won by, I think, 1 vote. So I'm glad it won, but I'm also glad that we all enjoyed it, because I thought it was definitely a great book, and I'm glad that we had such a great discussion about it. To go to Anita's comment, we do this every quarter, so we'll put up the next poll in June and then read something in July, and it's been fun, because I think we've had a kind of a good diverse number of selections. We had a few sci-fi in a row, and it was nice to do a bit of literary fiction this time around.
Yeah.
So
Carlos, thank you for letting me bully you into reading this.
yes,
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you
Yeah.
for joining us for this. We loved having you. Yay.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the excuse to get back to Steinbeck after several months. I think, what was the last one we did? Oh, it was the Long Valley. Yeah. So yeah, I really liked it. It felt like quintessential Steinbeck, and then each story with certain characters, the more of Steinbeck you read, you're like, this is
The
where it
seeds.
started.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was nice. It was nice to do that. It was nice to see a lot of Mice and Men and Grapes of Wrath in its embryonic form.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
true.
I
Great way.
could feel that. Even though I've only read East of Eden, I could feel like that thematic or the writing connection there. I was like, yeah, this feels very familiar to me.
Yeah.
So cool.
Well, thank you all for being here to chat with us. Thank you those that were in the chat and hanging out to talk about Pastures of Heaven. If you watch this on Team Replay, love to talk with you in the chat below. So just drop me a comment. And thank you, Evie, Johanna, and Carlos, for joining me this evening. And it's always fun to talk about Steinbeck. So good night, everybody, and good night very late for Carlos, and good night, everybody in the States. And thanks for hanging out. We'll see you at the next one.
Bye.
Bye.